with those who walk with them. And that's why we recognize that irrespective of whether we are speaking with a Muslim or a non-Muslim, morality is a universal principle that has to be shared by all human beings. For one thing that the human being does not want is an immoral society, or an immoral community, or an immoral set of principles. And that there are certain principles which are always put alongside the word moral, and there were many words which were put alongside the word immoral. For example, whenever you hear the word moral, you will always hear the word dignity. When you hear the word moral, you hear the word respect. When you hear the word moral, you hear the word cooperation. Whereas when you hear the word immoral, you will always hear of vice, of arrogance, of a lack of chastity. And therefore, the concept of morality is a universal concept shared by all human beings. That's why we see that with many of us, to maintain a brotherhood, there has to be a moral understanding in our life. For as Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, in a quite beautiful moral but universal principle of justice, he states, if someone is not your brother in faith, they are your equal in humanity. Working along the lines with this principle, we find that whenever we enter any relationship, or whenever we enter any contract, the religion of Islam sought to bring morality in every sphere of life. You see, there are certain cultures which say, keep the morality out of economics. Keep the morality out of politics. Politics is one game, morality is another. Economics is one game, morality is another. Whereas the religion of Islam wanted to place morality alongside economics, wanted to place morality alongside politics. And that's why we find the religion of Islam stressed that wherever you move in the world, people will always look at your akhlaq for any area you want to progress in. For example, today, if someone wants to get married, the first thing the family will ask, barring the odd bank statements and the cars and the flats, the first thing that the family will ask will be, what is the morals of this person who has come to propose? What is his reputation? Because the idea is that when you come to propose for someone's daughter, they want to know, is this person, is he wealthy? The wealth may come and go. But his morals, if he has been brought up in a family of morals, will remain with him. Because morals, whenever wealth leaves you, morals remains behind. A person who's been brought up in a household of morality is one who is full of respect. That's why when we go to apply for a job, there is a system where the person who you go to apply for will tell you straight away, provide me with a CV or a resume. And when you provide the CV or the resume, on there you have an area which is called references. The idea of the reference is that the person knows you may have got an excellent educational history. You may have been a person with many qualifications. But the references are because he wants to understand, are you a punctual human being? Are you a cooperative human being? Are you a patient human being? That when you're going to deal with my customers, am I going to trust you that you're going to be patient with them? Or am I going to see you that you're going to be abrasive? You're going to be rude. You're going to be angry very quickly. In the world of work, like the world of any of our relationships, morality plays a significant role. For a person who has morals on his reference, he will get the job straight away. Whereas a person who is abrasive and rude and arrogant will not find that the job is given to him, however many degrees he has on his resume. And that's why in history you find that morality and a moral community has been examined by many of the great philosophers. That when you go to people like Aristotle, or you go to people like Freud, or even you go to people like Dale Carnegie, when you study their works, you find that each one of them has their own philosophy when it comes to what makes a society moral, or what makes a moral community. For example, you find Aristotle used to say that if you want to build a moral community, every member of that community has to be knowledgeable and full of wisdom. He says these are the most important components when you want to build a moral community. Why? Because he says that when a person has knowledge, not only of himself, but of his culture, and of other cultures, of his religion, and of other religions, of his government, and of other governments, that person is going to be able to coexist with the other people in the community. Because there are two types of people in a community. You have a person who is very narrow-minded, and you have a person who's more open-minded. The narrow-minded person you will find is very rash in his decisions, very abrasive when you speak to them. Whereas an open-minded person, because of his knowledge and because of his wisdom, you find that he is easier to speak with. That when he disagrees with you, he tells you, I agree to disagree. So therefore Aristotle used to say that if you want to build a moral community, the most important component is make sure your people have knowledge and wisdom. Islam agrees with this to a point. That Islam stresses it is vital that you know your own religion and you know other people's religions. And you know your own culture and you know other people's cultures. You know your sciences and you know other sciences. But Islam said knowledge and wisdom is not enough to make a moral society. Why? Because how many times do you see that in history, some of the greats who were knowledgeable were not necessarily the most moral people. In history there are people with PhDs. There are in history people who were great professors, but at the same time they created a bomb where they were willing to finish off the whole of humanity. Does this mean that this person, because he's knowledgeable, he's going to be moral? No. Knowledge and morality, they may work together, but they may also not work together. There were people in history who were knowledgeable but arrogant. Because of their knowledge, they reached a level of arrogance. And that's why you find that Aristotle's theory that a good community is one made up of members who have strong knowledge and wisdom is right to an extent, but not completely. Then you have a second opinion. Freud used to say that if you want to build a community with morality, then make sure you bring up your children the best of upbringing from a very young age. He says the more focus is given on the child, the greater the morality of that community later on. And this is of course something we agree with in the religion of Islam. That when a person dedicates their time towards their children, listens to their children's opinions, however controversial they may be, then that person is going to make the child feel like he is a master at home. And if the child feels confident at home, the child will feel confident when he leaves the house. Whereas when a father or a mother do not open themselves up to listen to their children in the house, then those children will feel very insecure when they leave the house. Freud used to say that if you want to build a community with great morals, then bring up your children in a way where they feel comfortable with you. The earlier you bring them up, and the more emphasis you put on their upbringing, the more moral a community. Islam came back and said, we agree to a certain extent, that if you focus on your children's upbringing from a very young age, then there is a very strong chance that the community will be one full of morality. But Islam said on the other hand, history has shown us that there were many great fathers whose children did not necessarily turn out to be religious, even though they put emphasis on them. And there were many bad fathers whose children in some cases turned out to be great people. For example, Yazid, killer of Imam al-Hussein, had a child by the name of Muawiyah. And his child Muawiyah used to love Imam al-Hussein. And he had a profound love for Amir al-Mu'mineen. Yazid brought up his child from an early day. And he gave as much emphasis as possible. But he gave his child a moral upbringing on what he thought was moral. Notice how morality can be very relative. That when you examine morality, one of the most important concepts is to understand that while Islam agreed with Aristotle, it only agreed to a certain extent. And Islam agreed with Freud, but only to a certain extent. Why? Because Islam came forward and said that yes, most moral principles are universal. That if you were to go on the street right now in the middle of Dar es Salaam, come to a person who you do not know, tell him, do you acknowledge with me that murder is wrong? He'll say yes. Tell him, do you acknowledge that stealing is wrong? He'll tell you yes. Do you acknowledge that alcohol is wrong? He'll tell you, well, if you take a small amount, it's not necessarily wrong. Because here you find that morality can be relative. That morality can change with the times. That morality can be up to the person of the house. For example, in some communities today, you have some fathers who believe that if they beat their children, that is morality. Within Islamic households, he says to his child, I'll beat you with the belt in the way my dad beats me with the belt. Well, who told you your dad came with Islamic principles? Because your dad laid out a belt on your child does not mean on you. Does not mean you lay it out on your child. Islamic moral system was not relative. The Islamic moral system came directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a very important point. Why? Because in the 20th century, when they came to examine akhlaq, they came and said akhlaq depends on the situation. You can have akhlaq depending on the situation. If it suits you, act this way. And if it suits you another way, you can act as you want. Dale Carnegie used to believe that morality depends on your social position. If you are going to move forward, act like you want to. But if it's going to affect your rise in society, then act as you want to. He didn't believe in a moral code of conduct except the one which you make for yourself. That's why in the Battle of Siffin, Abu Hurairah acted exactly like this. That morality was relative depending on what I feel and how the situation is. In the Battle of Siffin, Amir al-Mu'mineen is on one side of the army. Muawiyah is on the other. Abu Hurairah was nowhere on either. They turned around, they said, where's Abu Hurairah? He came round and he said his famous words. He said, Salah is good with Ali. And food is good with Muawiyah. But when they come to fight each other, the middle is the best for Abu Hurairah.